This is Mike and C, and this is another episode of You Can't Handle the Truth. And what is on our slate for today?
Well, Mike, what do you think? Do you think that health insurance companies or insurance companies in general have a conscience?
No, I don't think they have a conscience.
Do you think they should be allowed to have a conscience or a say in either moral, ethical, or religious beliefs?
It's a private company. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's problematic to allow for a corporation to ultimately what we're talking about here is we're talking about the new medical conscience bill. And
it goes into effect in July.
That goes into effect in July.
2023.
Yes, it's passed by both houses and signed into law by Desantis. And ultimately what it says is that, it addresses mainly medical providers. So it addresses mainly doctors having the ability to deny providing coverage to anybody based on ethical, moral, or religious beliefs.
Right, moral, ethical, or religious beliefs.
Now, what the bill also states is that health insurance companies also have that same right to deny coverage based on ethical, religious, or moral beliefs. And that goes into the next question. Do corporations, are they allowed to have ethical, moral, or religious beliefs? And at what point do you draw the line on what they're allowed to approve and deny? And then ultimately, is it just a way for health insurance companies, like all insurance companies, to weasel out of coverage?
I mean, those are great questions. We have to look at, from a lawyer standpoint, what do we look at? We look at precedent. Okay, what happened in the past? Okay, well, Title VII and Title IX, the federal laws, what do? They prohibit employers, for example, from discriminating based on various factors. One of them is gender. One of them is race, disability, age, national origin, religion. That's a federal law. Title IX is more into athletics. You can't discriminate in the NCAA, for example. So now, I mean, do you think that this law that's going into effect in July, what does that do? What does that say about the existing laws with Title VII or Title IX, or is it totally irrelevant or inapplicable? I mean, that's a question that I thought of right away.
Right. Well, I think that that's a question with a lot of the laws that are potentially going to be going into effect as of July 1st is, do they violate some sort of federal law or constitutional right, or is there some sort of infringement in these laws as well? So, but back to, not to get into the technical legal terminology of constitutionality of things. Yeah, but ultimately, like stepping back and just kind of looking at what that plain language in that bill, before you implement it and apply it, what that means and what that potentially could do, the consequences of that. I mean, so are they going to start looking at different types of medical conditions that certain different types of groups have and denying it completely? I mean, could this be a problematic to access to healthcare that you pay for? Like, what remedies do you have for this? Where do you draw the line? Should these health insurance companies have to tell you if they're going to basically discriminate against something that you are or you do based on their moral, religious, or ethical beliefs?
It's very interesting. From a capitalistic standpoint, you could argue on the other side that it could open the door to private companies now starting businesses that are catered to what another business deems to be moral, ethical, or religious beliefs. So here's how I look at it as. If you have someone that, let's just talk about a Republican mindset, the traditional Republican mindset. I'm not sure what we're dealing with these days, but let's say you have a mindset where, you have this aberration that's out there that's, for whatever reason, is just, this is what we believe in, and maybe it doesn't appeal to the masses anymore. And I know I'm speaking in general terms, but a classic capitalist, what we'll call it, instead of a Republican, is going to say, well, the system, the market will take care of itself. If you got a bad egg, and this bad egg is refusing medical services to an accepted group, accepted is a very tough word these days, then they're going to, the capitalistic system means that they're going to be routed out. The market is going to get rid of them. It's like having a bad egg in a sports league where you have this idiot that's out there, running his mouth, and the league decides not to discipline that person. Well, that person's probably not going to be around much longer because no team is going to pick that person up.
Right.
It's a little different, but I don't know if that's coming into play as well here. What do you suppose is, I mean, do we know what the main purpose was for DeSantis signing in this bill?
Well, I think just in general, the underlying theme and purpose of it is to target women's healthcare and to target transgender healthcare. And that's the two main targets from this bill. And we can tell that by all the additional legislation targeted to those groups. And then, ultimately kind of making access to transgender care difficult and possibly obsolete is what the undertone is. And that's, I mean, it's the undertone.
Good points. I mean, what do you think? You mentioned women as well, not just transgender. So how do you think it affects women?
So what we're seeing trending wise, right, in these laws and bills that are being pushed and passed by certain states and legislators and lawmakers are generally that, women shouldn't have the right over their own reproductive, decisions. And then also to limit the type of contraceptions that women can have, or possibly not begin to not even provide contraception. There is this extremist view out there that you should have limited access to that too. And ultimately that's what the underlying tones, or at least that's what's coming out from, ultimately the Democrats in Florida when they're talking about these bills and filibustering on the House floor about these bills, what the underlying undertones, reading in between the lines of what this legislation really says.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with the contraception issues. Why do you suppose, I don't want to get too far into that section of it, but what do you suppose is the reason why they would want to do that?
You fooled me. I do not know why they would want to do that.
Right.
To control women.
Population control, good thing or bad thing?
Yeah, right. Well, I think,
I mean, it's tough to decipher some of this because on its face, if you just pull out, and that's one of the problems is a lot of times nowadays we're looking at things very quickly, and if you're not careful, you can not look at the whole picture. But if you look at a glimpse of that law, it would appear on its face to be in contravention to what we've established back in the days of going back to those employer, hey, you just don't discriminate. You're allowed not to like things and not like people. And that's where I'm kind of in a situation where it's like, this is my thing. I'm not going to discriminate against you, but don't force me to do something I don't want to do. However, the big picture is don't discriminate, right? Isn't that the big picture?
Right.
That's what we're supposed to not do.
Well, my big question that I'm kind of posing, and when I think about when I heard this, watched, the debate on this, from both sides of the aisle, essentially, is what medical provider goes into a practice area of medicine that doesn't want to be able to provide that service? They don't.
It's out there.
What medical doctor is calling their legislators saying, I need an exception to provide care. I don't want to provide it, so I need an exception. What doctor is doing that?
Right.
I don't think any.
I mean, don't you think this was backed by the insurance industry?
With the fact that it includes insurance, it definitely was backed by the insurance industry.
The insurance industry is what's going to support his presidential campaign. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you might as well call Apple. I mean, again, I'm not anti, one side of the coin or the other, but I mean, reality is reality. I mean, if you want to get votes, what do? You grease the pockets of these big companies. And why do you suppose, going back to the beginning of the discussion, why do insurance companies, let's think about this for a second. Why do insurance companies want to refuse services? Well, I mean, I think we know that answer, right? I mean, do we know that?
Yeah, it helps their bottom line to be able to deny services. And if you kind of look at the totality of all the bills, now they almost went for trying to eliminate you as an insured to be able to go against your insurance company without having to pay out of pocket or without having to pay half of the recovery of what you're fighting for. And ultimately, you would be denied that coverage and not have a remedy to pursue that coverage. Yeah, that was all initially what was transpiring. And so to look at it, if you're really paying attention and if you're really listening to what's happening, and if you're looking at it from an outsider looking in, that is ultimately kind of what the theme of it all is essentially that, it's helping the corporation, it's trying to eliminate, the access to care for certain types of people. and trying to eliminate the access to even bringing a lawsuit for your rights. And this, I think there's some additional language. You don't have the full amount of the language pulled up here, but ultimately it also, what it does is I believe it gives them some sort of it gives them immunity for not, I think it even says that it gives them immunity for not even being able to pursue action against them for the denial.
Right.
So ultimately you have no remedy.
Right. It's going to be attacked on the constitutionality of it. If it already, I mean, it probably has. I haven't been following it, to a T. That's why I like these times where we can talk about it. But no, I mean, there's some issues there. Come on. I mean, as someone that is here to take two sides of a coin, there's issues here, and it's going to go down the line. But I see this as ultimately being, in the big picture sense, being connected with insurance on some level. It's because, like you said, I don't know any doctors are going to go out there and hang out a shingle or work with a group, because nowadays they're all being bought out by groups anyway. Where the group's going to take this holistic approach of like, we're refusing medical care to you because of this.
Yeah.
And, can you see this going federal?
No.
Something like this?
No, I can't see this.
There you go. Right. And why not?
Well, because it's unconstitutional. And it limits your access to health care that you are entitled to because you pay for it. And it limits your right to pursue a claim that you've been denied, that you might be entitled to actually receive.
The spirit of our country, whether right or wrong, is to allow people to be able to appeal it. So that's kind of, so anyway, that's where we're at with this at this point.
That's where we're at with this, but there's a lot to be kind of determined and established. But if you like this, if you have comments, thoughts, suggestions, if you'd like to hear something from us, comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.